Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host the Madlik Disruptive Torah podcast on your favorite platform, and this week we are launching on YouTube, so this is really exciting. This week's parsha is Bereshit. There are those who would have us believe that in creation, God made unity from chaos, and that the Torah's endgame is to find that unity once again. We explore an alternative counterfactual approach, where God created through division, and with a goal of creating a world where divisions are emphasized, managed, but definitely not erased. So join us for our first podcast of the year, Splitting the Atom. And Rabbi Mintz, as I said that, I realized that you are Adam Mintz. We are splitting the atom.
So that's why I was especially excited about this one, because I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm getting nervous.
Well, first of all, as I said in the intro, this is our first broadcast on YouTube. So it'll be on all the other platforms, but also on video on YouTube. And I was setting it up and looking at putting down our bios and stuff, and I had the most amazing experience. I stumbled upon your new RabbiMintz.com, your new website. I think it's new because I've never seen it before.
It is new.
And it says the Premier Orthodox Conversion Rabbi. And that is so exciting. And hopefully during the course of the year, we will talk a little bit more about that. I'll definitely put a link, RabbiMintz.com, in the show notes. So that is so exciting. But meanwhile, we have a new Torah to start reading all from the start again. It's truly amazing that we're here. So I have to tell you, I was in my shul and I was davening. Because we go visual now, I'm holding up the machzor that I was reading. And on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, I came across the following prayer that is made at the end of the Amidah, where traditionally you're supposed to add a personal supplication. You can ad-lib a little bit. And I have put it in the Sefaria show notes that I am also going to share. And it says, Yehi ratzon milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu. So far, nothing is new. Creator of beginnings, as you created your world on this day, because it is Rosh Hashanah, uniting fragments into a universe, so may it be your will and help to unite my fragmented heart and the heart of all your people. Israel, to love and revere you, illuminate our lives with the light. It's an absolutely beautiful prayer. It was translated by Jules Harlow. It's a little bit of a synopsis of the longer prayer, which I do show. And it comes from Rabbi Nathan ben Moshe Hanover, who wrote an amazing collection of prayers. It's called Sha'arei Tzion. It was written in 1662. This is not a new book. And Gershon Sholem, in his great book on the Kabbalah, really says this was an extremely influential book, and it was infused with the Lurianic doctrines of man's mission on earth, his connections with power of the upper worlds, the transmitigations of his soul, and his striving to achieve tikkun were woven into prayers. So, Rabbi, certainly when you look at this beautiful prayer, and I must have used this machzor many times before, but I never really noticed it. It talks about nisyachteta ba'olamecha, this combining of the different species. And certainly, at my first inclination was, God created the world out of tohu and vohu, out of chaos, and therefore this man saw the unity in it. but he clearly is looking at it from a perspective which we might consider kind of modern, this tikkun, this being able to fix the fragments, to bring everything together. So Rabbi, have you seen this prayer before? Just reading it now, what are your thoughts? I just found it was charming, and of course, because Rosh Hashanah is the birth of the world, and we are discussing in our Parsha the birth of the world, it's also very relevant.
So the answer is thank you, Geoffrey. I am not familiar with this prayer, but it's a wonderful prayer. You're right. It's a beautiful prayer. And the idea of uniting fragments into a universe, or uniting fragments to create the human being, right? It says uniting fragments into a universe, uniting fragments to create the human being. I think that's a great idea because, as we know, and this is what we're going to talk about, the story of creation has 5 days of creation. Everything is created. Then the human being, and it turns out to be man and woman, are created on the 6th day. So somehow the creation of humans is the culmination of the creation process. So this prayer sees that as taking the first 5 days of creation and uniting them all together and then creating the human. And that's uniting fragments into a universe. Nityachta biolamach means that you unify everything in the world. We take everything and we as humans represent a unified world. That's really a beautiful idea.
It is, and I love that you bring it all the way to Adam and Eve, because of course, I think if the end of the Parsha, when we talk about the Garden of Eden, there's a book called Return to Eden. This whole concept of how the world began and where it ends up is so critical to Judaism, to any religion who has its Genesis myth. So, as I said in the intro, I'm going to disrupt this prayer today. And I'm going to go into an absolutely opposite direction, because when I thought about it for a second, it seems to me that there is a total different read that you could read of all of creation, which has less to do with unity and more to do with division. And we are, because we are Disruptive Torah, going to actually kind of follow that thread of what happens if you read the Parsha, not from the basis of a tikkun olam. And of course, what I didn't say is this prayer seems so modern. It was written in the 1700s, but it is so apropos of the way people think of religion as a unifying force. But I think that there is a second, just as critical message that is as powerful, if not more powerful, in terms of a force of division and creation through division. So let's begin. We are in Genesis 1:1, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, when God began to create the universe. V'haaretz hayta tohu and vohu. The world was just full of unformed and void. And of course, the interesting thing here is the correct translation is not so much when God began to create, or in the beginning, kind of like God, there was nothing there, ex nihilo yesh me'ayin. If you look at the text itself, it's God's creating to move around the pieces. He's beginning to deal with tohu and vohu. And so what does he do? There was darkness on the face of the deep, and a wind was blowing. And in verse 3 it says, God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. So here, up until now, we only have one verb, bara, that God was creating. The second verb that we get is vayavdel, that God separated. And what did he do by way of separating? He separated light from darkness. God called the light day, called the darkness night, there was evening, there was a morning, a first day. So, Rabbi, you cannot but ignore the fact that Havdalah, something that we do once a week at the end of Shabbat, becomes a star player here. God has really not so much created as divided between night and day.
You ask. Yeah. So my question is, why is it so important that God separated between night and day? Why couldn't we have lived for the past 5,785 years with 24 hours of twilight? Why would that have been so terrible? Means there seems to be this idea of separation. Now, actually, in the next day, God separated the water on top and the water on bottom, and you get to that afterwards. So this idea of separation isn't just night and day. It seems to be that creation is partially about separation.
Separation or putting objects into order. In other words, if we don't project, and this is what I was trying to say before, that God somehow created matter out of nothing. If we don't project onto the text, it seems that the most creative thing that God is doing, and you've gone ahead already to the second day, is separating things. And that is where she shows his creativity, and that's where the value add is. So as you say in verse 6, it says, God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water. Vayehi mavdil bein mayim lemayim. I think it, as much as anything else, it is showing something about the creative process. And first and foremost, in the creative process, if we forget about the Big Bang for a second and say, no matter what was before, once creation starts, God is putting things into order. He is separating one thing from another. He's creating clarity, if you will. But that clarity is mostly created by dividing stuff. You have a messy desk, you start making order. So if we go on and we go into verse 14, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years, and they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. And it was so. And then it goes on to say, God made the two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser light to dominate the night and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine unto the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was a good. So here too, and this of course is a continuation of what he did on day one, but now he's not only separating, he is not separating equally, he's making value judgments, he's assigning tasks and utilities in terms of serve as signs for set times, for days and years. It's really, he is getting very creative in terms of what he's putting into different place. He's giving jobs, he's giving characteristics to these things. If you look at Rashi on 116, great luminaries, they were created of equal size, but that of the moon was diminished because she complained and says, it is impossible for two kings to make use of one crown. Ve'et kochavim, the stars, because he diminished the moon, he increased its attendant host to modify it. This is such a precious and beautiful and kind of poignant commentary that I'm going to go to the sources, because now already we're starting to get into how do you orchestrate? How do you work with different beings that have different functions, and maybe those functions aren't equal? Crisis control all of a sudden, interpersonal relationships. We are personalizing these things, but all we are is we are what? 16 verses into Genesis, and we already have crisis management. We already have the problem with making Havdalah, which is jealousy, which is competition. Isn't that fascinating?
Well, that's fascinating. So I just want to say, before we look at the Gemara, which tells us a tale, a legend, you know, God creates the sun and the moon, and he creates them unequal. It's almost as if within creation, God wants to teach us exactly like what you said, is that not everything can be equal. We need to figure out how to manage with things that are unequal. Now, the Gemara and the Rashi are concerned with it's not fair. And that's one of the problems of being unequal. But you made the most important point of all and that is life is not fair. Life is unequal. So therefore, right there in the fourth day of creation, we have this issue as if we're already dealing not only with creation, but with how to deal with the different pieces of creation, like we deal with different people. Not everything can be equal, which is remarkable.
I mean, it's conflict resolution, and we cannot look at human beings and put the blame there. This is part of God's plan. So first he goes ahead and divides, and then he starts creating inequity and divisions, and even attributing to these inanimate objects jealousy and competition. It is truly amazing, because I think you have to make the argument that it's part of his or her plan. It's not... And so when we start from the perspective of that beautiful meditation, where everything is about unity and shleimut, and this sense of nirvana, here we have a creator who's creating differences from the get-go in a very profound way. So yes, you have the Gemara in Chulin that talks about the moon said before the Holy One, blessed Master of the universe, is it possible for two kings to serve with one crown? I mean, God could have answered yes, but he clearly, as you say, recognizes that that is going to be a problem. And of course, here it almost rings of much later on with Haman, where he says, you came up with the question, you should now go ahead and diminish yourself. You were the one who brought this up. Then we get to Bereshit Rabbah, and again it goes into the same thing, but here it starts to say that one of the payoffs, one of the dividends that the moon gets is because the moon will have an ally with the Jewish people. And so all of a sudden, as I said in verse 16, we're talking not only about inanimate objects, we're talking about God's chosen people, or should I say differentiated people, the people that was segmented out, and they have an ally with this diminished moon. So he's almost already saying that he might even have a preference for the minority, for the diminished. It's pretty amazing if you think about it. Here in verse 16, we're getting into all of this stuff.
Well, it always reflects back to the Jewish people. And in the book of Devarim, now it seems very far away, but in the book of Devarim, Moses tells the people that God loves you, ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim, because you are the smallest of all the nations. So clearly there's a preference. Now in Bereshit, we're going to have every story where the younger son is the one who's the favored son. So that this idea that being the moon is actually maybe to the benefit of the moon. That means the moon is going to be favored. And of course, in Jewish history, we're about to start the holiday of Simchat Torah, which is a lunar holiday, which means that it's based on the month of the moon rather than the month of the sun. The whole world goes on the month of the sun, but we follow the month of the moon. So actually, there's a benefit by being in second place.
I love what you said, and of course, if you look, and I really recommend that everybody look at the source sheet, in Bereshit Rabbah 6:4, after talking about the moon, it talks about Menashe and Ephraim, Katon Gadol Yechiyah, that Jacob puts his hands, he switches his hands, and he favors the small. So it truly is, the Midrash is not missing the point here. It understands that God creates not only by differentiating, not only in assigning different tasks, different characteristics to things, but then starts to show a little bit of his affection for the underdog, for the smaller. And then we go to Genesis 2, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy. Vayivarech Elokim et Yom Hashvi'i vayikadesh oto, having ceased on it from all the work of creation that God had done. The Ibn Ezra says, Vayikadesh oto shelo nasta bo melacha komo chaveirav. The word Chaverav really rang true to me. The seventh day didn't have a mate, didn't have a pair. It's an uneven number. God again started to divide between days of the week, and he had this oddball day, this odd man out called Shabbat, and he separated it from the rest of the week. So this concept of separating doesn't stop with the 6 days of creation. It even enters into creating what could be considered the Jews' greatest contribution to the world, which is the seventh day. So that then we can start to think of the Midrashim. I mentioned earlier, Rabbi, that we're using a word Havdalah that most Jews knows because of the Havdalah ceremony. It is the ceremony that we do at the end of Shabbat. But normally I dare to say we don't combine it with this concept of Havdalah that happens throughout creation. But I'm going to try to do that. I think the Midrash do it very well in terms of there's a direct connection between the creativity that God effected using this Havdalah, making Shabbat, which was different, and lahavdil ben all of the other work days, and how it married this into the narrative. What thinks you?
Yes, I mean that. You see that the difference between Shabbat and the week is a very interesting thing. Let's talk about this week. I know we're now going on video, so it's not only right now that people are listening, but we can refer to what this week is. This week is Simchat Torah, and we in the diaspora have observed over the past month 3 long weekends that go from Chag to Shabbat, right? Thursday, Friday, and then Shabbat. Now, when we go from Friday to Shabbat, we do something interesting, and that is we just make regular Kiddush for Shabbat. It's like a straight line from the Chag to Shabbat. But if the Chag were to fall out on Saturday night, we actually would recite Havdalah on Saturday night going into the Chag, because Shabbat is considered to be special. So I'm just pointing that out because when you talk about separation, Havdalah, Shabbat from the rest of the week, that has come to identify what separation means, what Havdalah means. And the fact that even when we go from Shabbat to a Chag, we still say separation. Separation is something that is really, is something that's so fundamental. And I'll just tell you this last thing. And that is, if you make Havdalah from Shabbat to a Chag, and those people who want to look forward to the next Chag is Pesach. And Pesach is going to fall out on Saturday night this year. So we're going to recite this Havdalah. And the Havdalah that you make is Baruch Atah Hashem, Hamavdil Bein Kodesh LeKodesh. Exactly what you have right here. Now that's remarkable, Geoffrey, because usually we say Hamavdil Bein Kodesh Lechol, God who separates from holy to mundane to everyday. That's a distinction. But it's in our tradition, we understand even the subtlest of separations, and that is Hamavdil Ben Kodesh LeKodesh. I'll just tell you a funny story. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who was probably the greatest Orthodox mind of the second half of the 20th century, said that when he was a little boy, 5 years old, and for the first time he heard this Havdalah of Hamavdil Ben Kodesh LeKodesh, he said he couldn't sleep the whole night because he couldn't understand what it meant to make Havdalah Bein Kodesh LeKodesh.
It's kind of like they say about the Eskimos that they have 50 words for snow. We Jews at least have two different madrigot levels of Kedusha.
That's very good.
But I love that you brought that up because it's appeared to me in that special Kiddush that you mentioned, at a certain point it says, Hivdalta v'kidashta et amcha Yisrael b'kedushatecha. And it seems to me that the word Kedusha can mean almost Havdalah. In other words, when the verse says Kedoshim Tihiyu, that you should be holy, the rabbis, the Pharisees, who are called in Hebrew the Perushim, says Kedoshim Tihiyu, Perushim Tihiyu. So if you want to talk about the power of separation, Perush means to divide, to separate. Because holiness at the end of the day is to take something and divide between Chulin and Kedushin. And so when I am saying that we are reading this lens today of the beginning of Bereshit from a whole new lens, not one of homogeny, not one of nirvana where all of the sharp edges are sanded down and everything becomes unified. If anything, we're finding a very strong element of the power of differences, of the power of separation. And that, in fact, is the source of Kedusha. So getting back to that first Shabbat, yes, by making it separate from the rest of the week, by making one last Havdalah between when he worked and when he stopped working, God was continuing the process of creation and created this amazing Shabbat. And if you look at the source sheet, you'll see Bereshit Rabbah. There are midrashim that believe that Adam and Eve, and we're going to get to that hopefully in a few seconds, when they sinned was the afternoon of Friday. And so there was 12 hours in the afternoon of that day where they sinned. Then there was Shabbat. And then they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They were expelled, otherwise known, Rabbi, as Havdalah. They were separated out of Eden, and the tradition is that God gave them Shabbat so that they could experience the hidden light of creation, but more importantly, or as importantly, he gave Adam the first invention. He gave him fire. And he taught him how to make fire after he cast him out of the garden in Eden. And that is why we say Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh at the Havdalah ceremony. So now already we have invention as well as creation. And so what I want to finish up with, Rabbi, is the story in chapter 2, of the creation of Eve. Because here too, there is this sense that Adam was unified, was one person, and he is the only element of creation who was lo tov. Lo tov liota Adam levad. And so he had to go through that division as well. And so in Genesis 2:21, God cast a deep sleep upon the human, and while he slept, God took one of his sides, v'yikach, again, another verb that has to do with separating, and he made Eve, etzem ma'atzmi ubasar mibasari. Normally we think of this as a unifying element, that it was flesh of my flesh, and but I emphasize on the me'atzmi. It was flesh taken from, kind of like when you take challah, Rabbi. And then, what is he called? Al-Kain, and then it says, Al-Kain ya'azov ish et aviv. And therefore a man should, what? Separate from his parents. And I would argue not only from his parents on earth, who Adam actually did not have, but also maybe his parents Shebashamayim. I think if you look at the story of the sin of, we call it a sin, but if you look at the story of the eating of the tree, the apple of the tree of the knowledge, and then the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, it is this necessary separation. And it puts into a whole new guise, I believe, what is necessary, the necessary elements in this creation myth. And when I say creation now, we're talking about humanity as well. We're talking about splitting the atom. Rabbi Mintz?
That's great. So I'll just finish up by saying everything you said is fantastic. The best thing you said was that Adam was the one thing that was not tov, lo tov heyot adam levado, and therefore he needed to go through separation. Adam himself, and there he's only a man, himself needed to be divided because division is the process of creation. That's a fantastic idea, that creation means division. You can only create by separating. And that's what the Torah comes to tell us. And it's separation for the sake of ultimate unity. I think that's, make your point even stronger. It's the separation for the sake of ultimate unity, because that's what we try to do. We try to take opposites. We try to take separated things and we try to make them work together. They're not equals, but we try to make them work together. This is a fantastic way to begin. I can't wait for the rest of the Torah.
I love it. Give me one last word, though, because as you know, and we love this, it says, Vayiven Hashem et Hatzela, that he built Eve from this rib, and we know from there that according to the Talmud and other sources, that women have binah. And what is binah? It's a type of wisdom. Vayiven davar mitoch davar. If you think, Rabbi, in terms of science, how do scientists discover things? They separate phenomenon so that they can analyze one phenomenon not mixed up with another. Without that separation, you have nothing. So we really have this true source of binah, of understanding. And to your point, I love this further midrash, which says, when in Genesis 3:6, and when the woman saw that the tree was good, and it was a delight to the eyes, and the desired to eat, she took of its fruit and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. And so Rashi says that she was afraid if she ate it and he did not, that she would die and he would go get married to somebody else. It almost is a story of Romeo and Juliet. And it's a story of Romeo and Juliet. And this Ima, Rabbi, is exactly what you were saying. It's this cleaving of two different people together who can survive the rejection of their parents on earth, their parents in heaven, create their new life together. And I think that becomes then an amazing narrative of creation that starts with the heavens and ends with a couple, two human beings that are ima, that are together with each other. fascinating read on Breshit.
Amazing. Yashkoach to you. Shabbat shalom to everybody. Chag Sameach. And can't wait for next week. Chag Sameach, Geoffrey. Enjoy.
Chag
Bye-bye.
Sameach. All the best.